Vanessa didn't look surprised to see me walk into the boardroom that morning. But everyone else did. The moment I pushed the glass door open, the air felt wrong, too still, too quiet for a Monday. Usually by 9 in the morning, Monroe Transport was alive with movement. Phones ringing, dispatchers arguing over routes, someone laughing too loudly in the hallway. But that day, silence settled over the room like dust. Vanessa sat at the head of the long oak table, her posture straight, hands folded neatly in front of her. To her right sat 2 men in dark suits I had never seen before. Lawyers. I recognized the look instantly. To her left was our HR manager, Melissa, clutching a thick folder like it weighed more than paper. And along the wall, our employees, dispatchers, account staff, 2 drivers still in their work jackets, watching, waiting. No one met my eyes. "We've reviewed your recent behavior," Vanessa said before I even had the chance to sit down. Her voice was calm, too calm. "And we've decided to terminate your position effective immediately." The words didn't land all at once. They echoed inside my head, bouncing against years of early mornings and late nights until they finally made sense. "Terminate." Me. I stayed standing near the door, fingers still curled around the handle. For a second, I thought maybe this was a mistake, a misunderstanding that would unravel if I asked the right question. But then I saw it. A printed document sitting in front of Vanessa. My name typed neatly at the top. Termination notice. Prepared. Waiting. This hadn't just happened. This had been planned. And in that moment, deep in my chest, I felt something colder than shock settle into place. The quiet understanding that this wasn't about attitude. Something bigger was moving beneath the surface. I finally stepped forward into the room, each footstep louder than it should have been against the polished floor. The boardroom had always felt familiar to me, safe, like an extension of the warehouse floor where I'd spent half my life solving problems before anyone else even noticed them. Now it felt staged, like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. Vanessa didn't gesture for me to sit. She didn't smile. She didn't soften her voice the way she used to when we disagreed over strategy. Instead, she kept her gaze steady. Professional, detached. "Rachel," Melissa began, flipping open the folder in her lap, her voice tight. "We've documented several incidents of disruptive communication and ongoing attitude issues that have negatively impacted team morale." I blinked slowly. Disruptive communication. Attitude issues. The words sounded foreign, like they belonged to someone else's story. Not mine. Around the room, chairs shifted softly. Someone cleared their throat. Still, no one spoke. I turned slightly, searching the faces along the wall. Men and women I had hired, trained, stayed late with during storms when routes needed rerouting and tempers ran high. Not one of them looked directly at me, except Daniel, our junior accountant. For half a second, his eyes met mine, wide, uneasy, before he quickly looked down at the papers in his lap. His fingers trembled as he adjusted them. Fear. Not guilt. Fear. Something about that sent a warning crawling up my spine. "You've also demonstrated resistance to recent operational changes," Vanessa continued, her tone steady but edged with impatience. "Your unwillingness to adapt has created tension across departments." Resistance. My mind scrambled backward through the past few weeks. Long nights reviewing shipment logs. Emails questioning unusual expense increases. Conversations with dispatch when schedules didn't line up. Not resistance. Concern. And suddenly, the memory snapped into place. The late-night report I'd flagged just 3 days ago. A shipment delay blamed on driver error, when in reality the routing system had failed entirely. A system I had warned needed updating. I shifted my gaze back to Vanessa, but something else caught my eye. A spreadsheet near her elbow. The title printed boldly across the top. Operational Restructure, Phase 1. I didn't need to read the rest to feel the meaning settle into my stomach. My name wasn't on that page. Not anywhere. That wasn't a termination. That was replacement. Something inside me tightened. This wasn't about personality conflicts or communication style. This was structural, deliberate. "Rachel," Vanessa said again, sliding the document across the table toward me. "All we need is your signature acknowledging receipt." The paper stopped just inches from my hand. I didn't touch it. Instead, I scanned the text slowly, forcing myself to breathe evenly while my heart pounded harder than it had during any crisis shipment or overnight reroute I had ever handled. Termination effective immediately. Access privileges revoked. Operational authority transferred. Transferred. That word lingered in my mind longer than the rest. And then, without thinking, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my access badge. I turned toward the side cabinet, the one that stored route logs and operational backups, and pressed it gently against the sensor. Red light. Denied. I frowned and tried again. Red. Denied. A cold realization slid into place. They hadn't just planned this meeting. They had already removed me. Before I even walked into the room. Behind me, someone shifted in their chair. I glanced back again, and this time I saw it clearly. One of the senior dispatchers, a man who had worked beside my father for years, shook his head almost imperceptibly. Not disagreement. Warning. Don't speak yet. Don't react. That silent gesture hit harder than any accusation, because it told me what words couldn't. Something was happening here that went far beyond a simple firing. Vanessa tapped the table lightly, impatience creeping into her posture. "Rachel," she repeated. "Sign the document." But as my eyes drifted back toward the stack of folders in front of her, something else caught my attention. A second file, partially hidden beneath the first, labeled in bold black letters. My name. And beneath it, a date from months ago. A file I didn't remember creating. Didn't remember approving. Didn't remember seeing. And that was the moment the unease inside me hardened into certainty. This wasn't just about removing me from the company. Someone had been preparing to erase me long before today. The paper in front of me should have felt like the worst moment of my life. But instead, it pulled me backward, years into the past, to the first time I ever held a clipboard inside Monroe Transport. I could still smell it if I closed my eyes. Diesel fuel, grain dust, the sharp bite of cold Nebraska air drifting through the open warehouse doors. I had been barely out of college, standing in boots that still looked too new, trying to convince myself I belonged there. My father didn't greet me like a daughter that morning. He handed me a clipboard. "Route check," he said, not smiling. "Truck 3 leaves in 20 minutes. Make sure the manifest matches the load." No hug. No welcome speech. Just work. At the time, I remember feeling disappointed, even a little hurt. But years later, I understood exactly what he had done. He didn't give me comfort. He gave me responsibility. And in our family business, responsibility meant everything. Monroe Transport didn't start with money. It started with one truck, one contract, and a promise that deliveries would arrive exactly when we said they would. My father used to repeat the same line to every new driver who walked through our doors. "Your word is your contract. If you break it, nothing else matters." That promise built our reputation, and that reputation built our company. I learned early that this business wasn't something you watched from behind a desk. You lived inside it. You solved problems before they turned into disasters. You stayed late when others left. One winter, I saw that lesson unfold in a way I never forgot. A snowstorm had rolled across the state overnight, burying highways under ice and white drifts that swallowed road signs whole. One of our drivers quit halfway through his route, just abandoned the truck at a roadside station and walked away. Most companies would have delayed delivery. Not my father. He grabbed his coat, drove 3 hours through frozen roads, and finished the route himself. I remember watching him return late that night, boots soaked, shoulders stiff from cold and exhaustion. But the delivery was made, and the customer stayed with us for another 10 years. That was the standard we lived by. Years later, after I had settled into the rhythm of the company, that standard was tested in ways none of us expected. The first real crisis came quietly, Not with a dramatic explosion or a financial collapse, but with confusion. Routes began overlapping. Drivers showed up at the wrong loading docks. Fuel costs crept higher each month without explanation. Delivery times stretched longer. Customers calling to ask why shipments were arriving late. At first, everyone blamed weather, or traffic, or human error. But I kept noticing patterns. The same trucks rerouted twice. The same stops appearing on multiple manifests. Schedules printed differently depending on which department generated them. One night, after another long day of phone calls and apologies to frustrated clients, I stayed behind in the office while everyone else went home. Stacks of paper surrounded me. Route logs, fuel receipts, delivery confirmations. I spread them across the desk until the surface disappeared beneath numbers and handwriting. That was when I saw it. The scheduling system hadn't been updated in nearly a decade. 10 years of growth layered on top of software designed for half our current volume. It wasn't just inefficient. It was dangerous. I didn't wait for permission. I stayed late every night that week. Then the next, teaching myself software updates, redesigning route structures, cross-checking delivery paths until the numbers finally made sense again. There were nights when the only sound in the building was the hum of the computer and the ticking clock on the wall. Nights when I rested my head on folded arms for just a few minutes before forcing myself upright again. Once, I fell asleep in the office chair altogether. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the blinds, and my neck ached so badly I could barely turn my head. But the system finally worked. Routes aligned. Fuel usage dropped. Delivery time stabilized. The chaos disappeared almost overnight. No one gave a speech about it. No celebration. Just quiet relief, the kind that settles into a building like warm air after winter. The next challenge came not long after. A major agricultural supplier, one of our largest clients, threatened to cancel their contract. Late deliveries during the earlier confusion had shaken their trust. Their manager warned us bluntly that they were already considering other transport companies. I still remember sitting across from him in a cold office, palms damp against the folder in my hands. My voice stayed steady, but inside, my nerves twisted tight. I explained our updated routing system, walked him through contingency plans, showed him data proving delivery times were improving week by week. At the end of that meeting, he studied me for a long moment. Then he signed. That single signature kept our trucks running and our bank accounts stable through one of the most uncertain periods we had ever faced. When I returned to the warehouse that night, my father was waiting in his office, lights dim except for a single desk lamp. He didn't smile right away. He studied me, the way he always did when he was measuring something deeper than results. "You handled it," he said finally. "Not praise, recognition." Then he leaned back in his chair, reaching into the locked drawer behind his desk. From inside, he pulled a sealed envelope. Thick, official. He placed it carefully on the desk between us. "There are roles in this company," he said slowly, "that don't come with titles, but they carry weight." I stared at the envelope, unsure what to say. "This protects the company if things ever go wrong," he added. He didn't explain further, didn't give details, just slid the document toward me and pointed to the signature line. I trusted him. So I signed. The legal language felt dense, technical, filled with phrases about operational continuity and certified transitions. Words that sounded important but distant, like something meant for lawyers and boardrooms, not daily work. 2 attorneys had been present that evening. Quiet men, observing, witnessing. At the time, I didn't question it. Didn't wonder why my father insisted that document remain with me instead of stored in company records. I simply folded the envelope and placed it carefully in my personal file cabinet, where it stayed for years without being opened again. Until now. Because as the memory faded and the boardroom came back into focus, one thought pressed hard against my chest. If the document my father made me sign was meant to protect the company, then why had no one mentioned it today? And more importantly, where was that original contract now, And who else knew it existed? Vanessa tapped her fingers against the table, sharp and steady, dragging me back into the present like a rope tightening around my chest. The memory of my father's office faded, replaced by the cold brightness of the boardroom lights. Papers rustled softly. Someone shifted in their chair. And across from me, Vanessa sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed somewhere just past my shoulder, not quite meeting mine. But it wasn't her who caught my attention. It was Marcus. Vanessa's husband leaned slightly back in his chair, arms resting casually along the table's edge. His expression was calm, almost detached. But his eyes moved constantly, watching, calculating. He wasn't nervous the way Vanessa was beginning to look. He wasn't impatient like Melissa or distracted like the employees along the wall. He was measuring, and for the first time that morning, I realized something I should have understood long ago. Vanessa might have held the title, but Marcus held the influence. That thought dragged another memory forward, not years ago this time, but months after our father passed away. The shift in power had happened quickly. Too quickly. There hadn't been long meetings or drawn-out debates about leadership. No vote. No formal transition discussions. One day, our father was gone. The next, Vanessa was announced as CEO. I remembered standing beside her in the warehouse office when the announcement letter arrived. The paper looked freshly printed, crisp and official, as if it had been waiting in someone's drawer long before the funeral flowers had wilted. I hadn't questioned it then. Grief makes you accept things without resistance. It makes silence feel easier than conflict. Vanessa had always been older, more polished, better at speaking to bankers and clients. I told myself it made sense. I told myself the company needed stability, not arguments. So I stayed where I had always worked, inside operations, where problems were solved with numbers, not speeches. At first, nothing seemed dramatically different. Vanessa held meetings, made announcements, smiled confidently in front of clients. But small changes began appearing around the edges, so subtle I almost missed them. Emails started arriving late. Meeting invitations stopped appearing in my inbox. Reports I used to review were suddenly finalized without my signature. I told myself it was temporary, growing pains after leadership change. Until one afternoon, I received a summary email describing decisions I had never been asked to attend. Operational changes already approved. Budgets already finalized. Routes already reassigned. I remember staring at the screen that day, rereading the message twice before realizing something simple but unsettling. They hadn't forgotten to include me. They had chosen not to. That was the first real crack. The second came when Marcus began showing up more frequently. At first, it seemed harmless. He would sit quietly during meetings, offering occasional suggestions about legal structure or contract language. After all, he had spent years working as a corporate attorney. His knowledge was useful, no one denied that. But usefulness slowly became influence. Influence turned into authority. I remember one meeting clearly, the moment everything shifted in a way that made my stomach tighten. Our CFO was presenting a quarterly financial report when Marcus leaned forward and interrupted him mid-sentence. "That liability structure won't hold under external review," Marcus said calmly, tapping the edge of the report with his finger. The CFO paused, looked uncertain, then corrected his own explanation based on Marcus's comment. Not because Marcus held a position, but because Marcus sounded confident. And from that moment on, his voice carried weight inside rooms he technically didn't belong in. Vanessa listened to him more than anyone else. That alone would have been concerning. But what came next was worse. Favoritism. The day Vanessa introduced her son Evan into the financial department felt harmless on the surface. He arrived dressed in a pressed shirt, eager smile stretched across his face, shaking hands with employees like he had already earned their trust. "He needs experience," Vanessa explained proudly. No one objected. Why would they? Family businesses always make room for family. But experience isn't learned overnight. And Evan didn't start at the bottom. He started with access. Financial reports began arriving with unfamiliar formatting. New categories appeared where none had existed before. Expenses were grouped differently, sometimes without explanation. At first, I assumed it was modernization, new software, updated reporting structure, until one evening, while reviewing monthly summaries, I noticed numbers that didn't match previous records. Not drastically, just enough to feel wrong. Fuel costs rising while route mileage remained unchanged. Maintenance budgets increasing despite fewer repairs reported. I remember sitting alone at my desk, calculator in hand, rechecking totals again and again until my eyes burned. The numbers refused to align. And then came the moment that truly unsettled me. The company secured a new operational loan. I didn't hear about it in a meeting. I didn't review the proposal. I didn't sign approval documentation. I found out by accident, flipping through financial summaries weeks later. The loan had been secured using company assets as collateral. Our trucks, our routes, everything that kept the company moving. I still remember the way my stomach dropped when I saw it, the cold weight settling into place beneath my ribs. Operational assets weren't something you gambled with. They were survival. When I asked about it, Vanessa brushed it aside. Expansion requires risk, she said casually, as if the decision had been routine. Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, offering a small nod that seemed to close the conversation before it could fully open. And now, standing in that boardroom again, surrounded by papers and accusations, the pieces finally aligned. The missing meetings, the altered reports, the loan I had never approved. All of it led here. All of it pointed towards something far more deliberate than personality conflict. My gaze drifted once more toward the stack of documents on the table. The second folder, the one labeled with my name, remained partially hidden beneath the termination papers. But now I could see more of it. Just enough to read the title stamped across its cover. Operational Transition Plan. My pulse quickened. Transition didn't mean removal. Transition meant replacement. And as my eyes narrowed, scanning the exposed page beneath the cover, one line became visible, typed neatly in black ink. Replacement candidate. Assigned. No name yet visible. Just confirmation that someone had already been chosen. Chosen without my knowledge. Chosen without my involvement. A chill slid down my spine as one final question settled into place inside my mind. If someone had already prepared to replace me, then how long had they been planning this moment before I ever walked into this room? No one in that room moved to defend me. Not when Vanessa accused me. Not when Melissa listed failures that sounded like someone else's story. Not even when the termination papers slid closer across the table, waiting for my signature like a trap already set. The silence pressed in from all sides. I scanned the faces along the wall again, searching for even the smallest sign of support. Drivers I had called at midnight to fix broken routes. Dispatchers I had trained from their very first shift. People who had stood beside me during snowstorms and equipment failures and impossible deadlines. Now they sat motionless. Still, watching. Only one movement broke the stillness. A senior dispatcher near the far corner gave the smallest shake of his head, so subtle most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. It wasn't disagreement. It was warning. Don't react. Don't speak yet. That silent message sent a ripple of unease through my chest, sharper than any accusation Vanessa had made. Melissa cleared her throat and began reading again, voice tight and rehearsed. Over the past several months, multiple operational failures have been documented under your leadership, she said, flipping through pages with mechanical precision, including delayed deliveries, communication breakdowns, and client dissatisfaction. Each phrase struck like a pebble hitting glass, not enough to shatter it outright, but enough to weaken it piece by piece. Delayed deliveries, communication breakdowns, client dissatisfaction. My jaw tightened. Those weren't lies, but they weren't truths either. They were fragments, pulled out of context and reshaped into something dangerous. One example stood out immediately. Incident report dated 3 weeks ago. Melissa continued. Delivery delay impacting the Henderson agricultural contract. My pulse quickened. I remembered that shipment clearly. A system routing failure had redirected the driver onto an outdated highway path, a problem I had flagged days earlier. A problem caused by software changes I hadn't approved. Yet here it was, written as my failure. Not the system's, not the unauthorized changes. Mine. I forced myself to breathe slowly, keeping my expression neutral even as frustration pressed against the inside of my chest. They weren't inventing mistakes. They were rewriting causes. And that realization made everything feel far more deliberate. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her gaze finally meeting mine. "You've also cost us one of our most important clients," she said. Voice steady but edged with something colder than anger. "Your inability to maintain relationships has damaged this company." That accusation landed harder than the rest. Because this one wasn't just professional. It was personal. The client she referred to, Archer Grain Supply, had been mine for years. I had spent countless late nights negotiating terms, resolving shipping delays, and maintaining communication when unexpected issues arose. I remembered storms that had shut down highways, equipment failures that had forced reroutes across 2 counties, emergency calls answered at 2 a.m. That client didn't leave because of neglect. They stayed because of persistence, which made Vanessa's words feel wrong, logically wrong, emotionally wrong. And then the realization struck me with sudden clarity. That contract had been renewed just days ago. Signed. Confirmed. Active. So how could they claim it was lost? The contradiction burned quietly in the back of my mind, growing hotter with every passing second. My thoughts shifted automatically toward numbers, the language I trusted most. Numbers didn't lie. People did. Recent financial reports had unsettled me long before this meeting. Fuel costs climbing without increased mileage. Maintenance charges appearing without documented repairs. At the time, I had assumed miscommunication. Now I wasn't so sure. One report in particular surfaced in my memory, a monthly summary that had felt strangely familiar when I reviewed it. I had noticed identical expense totals appearing across different weeks, as if someone had copied numbers instead of calculating them. At the time, exhaustion had dulled my suspicion. Now, standing inside this room, the pattern returned with frightening clarity. That wasn't coincidence. That was duplication. Intentional duplication. My gaze drifted across the room again, landing on Daniel, the junior accountant. He sat rigid in his chair, shoulders tense, hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wouldn't look at me. Not fully, not directly. But once, just once, his eyes lifted toward mine. And in that brief glance, I saw something unmistakable. Fear. Not guilt. Not arrogance. Fear. As if he knew something dangerous and wished he didn't. That silent exchange sent another wave of unease through me. Someone inside this company understood what was happening. Someone inside this room was afraid. Vanessa slid the termination document slightly closer across the table, impatience flickering across her expression. "All we need is your acknowledgement," she said. "Sign the document." "Rachel!" I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, keeping the movement small and controlled beneath the table's edge. A notification blinked silently on the screen. New message. Internal server address. No sender name. No subject line, except 4 simple words. Check page 12. My pulse surged. An attachment sat beneath the message. Unlabeled. Unexplained. For a moment, fear held my finger still above the screen. Whoever sent this risked exposure. Risked their job. Maybe more. I glanced up from the phone, scanning the room carefully. Vanessa leaned toward Melissa, whispering something under her breath. Marcus sat motionless, expression unreadable, but his eyes moved, constantly scanning, calculating, watching. The air inside the room felt heavier now, thick with tension that hadn't existed when the meeting began. Carefully, shielding the screen beneath the table, I tapped the attachment. The file began to load. Slowly. Painfully slowly. Lines of text flickered into view, formatted as scanned documentation rather than internal reports. My breath caught as the first page appeared. Internal adjustment record. Not a summary. Not a report. An adjustment log. Something used to modify numbers after they were recorded. I scrolled carefully, heart pounding harder with each movement of my thumb. Page 2. Page 5. Page 8. Then, page 12. Numbers filled the screen. Familiar numbers. Too familiar. Fuel charges listed across multiple shipment routes, but repeated in ways that made no operational sense. Identical figures appearing across different dates. Different trucks. Different delivery schedules. Not calculated. Copied. Duplicated. My chest tightened as understanding began forming piece by piece. This wasn't accounting. This was manipulation. And then I saw the column that made my stomach drop. Approval authorization. I expected to see the CFO's signature. Instead, another name appeared beside every adjustment entry. Evan Hale. Vanessa's son. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I stared at the screen. Evan didn't have authority to approve operational changes. Not at this level. Not without oversight. And yet, his name repeated again and again, attached to numbers that reshaped the company's financial structure without explanation. A chill spread through my chest as the pieces began aligning. Financial manipulation. Operational restructuring. Replacement planning. All connected. All deliberate. And as I lifted my eyes slowly from the phone, one final realization settled into place. This meeting wasn't about removing me quietly. It was about replacing me before anyone noticed what had already been changed. And somewhere inside this room, someone knew exactly how dangerous those numbers truly were. My finger hovered over the screen for half a second before I tapped the file again, forcing it fully open. The glow from my phone felt brighter than it should have beneath the table, like it might expose me at any moment. Around me, voices continued, Vanessa speaking sharply, Melissa flipping pages, but their words blurred into noise as numbers filled my vision. Page 12 sat frozen in front of me. Fuel adjustments, route charges, maintenance entries, all stamped with approval codes, all linked to Evan. At first glance, the numbers looked ordinary, the kind of figures I had reviewed thousands of times over the years. But the longer I stared, the more patterns began to surface. Identical figures repeated across different weeks. The same totals applied to separate routes. Perfectly symmetrical numbers, too clean to be real. No operational system produces identical cost entries across unrelated deliveries. Not without intervention. Not without intention. A slow chill crept down my spine as understanding formed piece by piece. These weren't mistakes. They were edits. I scrolled upward carefully. Breath shallow, making sure no one noticed the movement beneath the table. More adjustments. More approvals. More repeated numbers. And then I saw something that made my chest tighten. A name column. Approval authorization. My eyes locked onto the line. I expected to see the CFO's initials, the usual chain of authority that governed every operational change inside Monroe Transport. Instead, the same name appeared again, and again, and again. Evan Hale, Vanessa's son. My stomach dropped. Evan had barely spent a year inside the company. He was still learning the structure of our reports, still asking basic questions about fuel allocation and maintenance tracking. He wasn't authorized to approve operational changes. Not at this level. Not without oversight. Yet there his name was, stamped across adjustments worth more money than he should have been allowed to touch. I felt heat rise into my chest. Sharp and dangerous. This wasn't favoritism anymore. This was control. Unauthorized control. I scrolled further down, heart hammering harder with each swipe. Certain routes appeared more frequently than others, highlighted again and again across the adjusted entries. And that was when another pattern revealed itself. Those routes weren't random. They were mine. The highest volume agricultural shipments. The most profitable lines. The ones I had negotiated personally with clients who trusted our reliability above anything else. Every manipulated entry pointed toward routes I had built. Not Vanessa. Not Marcus. Me. A slow, cold realization spread through my chest. This wasn't just financial manipulation. It was targeted, deliberate, designed to weaken the structure I had created, piece by piece, until it collapsed under its own weight. I scrolled further, pulse pounding in my ears. Then I saw something else. A small text box tucked into the corner of the scanned page. Easy to miss unless you were looking carefully. Internal comment. 2 short words sat inside the box. Verify before transition. Transition. The word hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. Operational transition plan. Replacement candidate. The folder on the table. The restructuring spreadsheet. All connected. All feeding into the same outcome. They weren't just planning to fire me. They were preparing to replace me, using altered numbers to justify the shift. My throat tightened as I leaned slightly forward, shielding the screen even more carefully from view. Whoever sent this file had known exactly where to point me. Page 12. Not the beginning. Not the end. The center. The place where manipulation became undeniable. I tapped the screen again, pulling up the file details. Creation timestamp, just hours before this meeting. That detail hit harder than anything else. Someone inside this building had accessed the system, found the records, and sent them to me moments before I walked into this room. Not days ago. Not weeks ago. Today. That meant they knew what was coming. They knew this meeting wasn't routine. They knew I was about to be removed. And they had chosen to warn me. Fear tightened around my chest, sharp and immediate. Helping me meant risking everything. Jobs. Reputations. Possibly legal consequences. My pulse pounded louder as I lifted my gaze from the phone. Marcus was watching. Not directly. Not obviously. But his eyes tracked movement in the room with unsettling precision, scanning faces, reading reactions, measuring shifts in behavior. For half a second, his gaze drifted toward me. I locked the phone instantly, sliding it back into my pocket with controlled movement. Marcus didn't look away immediately. He studied me, silent, still, unblinking. A flicker of unease crawled up my spine. If he suspected I had seen something, if he guessed I had evidence, this situation would become more dangerous than I had anticipated. Vanessa's voice cut through the tension. "Rachel," she said sharply, "you're delaying the process." Her tone carried impatience now, thinly disguised frustration creeping through the calm surface she had maintained earlier. I lifted my eyes slowly, forcing my expression into something neutral, controlled, careful. But inside, my thoughts moved faster than they ever had. The financial entries weren't just irregular. They connected to something deeper, something structural. I reached into my pocket again, pretending to adjust my phone while reopening the file beneath the table. Scrolling further, beyond page 12, past the repeated adjustments, past the financial notes, until another section appeared. New heading, Insurance Liability Adjustment. My breath caught. Insurance documentation wasn't routine material for operational staff, but I recognized enough terminology to understand its importance. Operational coverage, performance thresholds, financial stability metrics, all interconnected. And then I saw it. Highlighted language referencing cost reliability verification. If financial records were manipulated, insurance evaluations could shift. If evaluations shifted, coverage could weaken, or worse, become invalid. A heavy realization settled into my chest, thick and suffocating. If these altered records had been submitted externally, if insurers reviewed falsified data, then the protection our company depended on might already be compromised. Every shipment, every delivery, every truck currently on the road, at risk. The weight of that truth pressed against my ribs until breathing felt difficult. This wasn't just about firing me. It wasn't even just about replacing me. This was structural sabotage. The kind of damage that didn't show immediately, but collapsed everything when pressure finally hit. I slowly lifted my gaze from the phone again, scanning the room one more time. Vanessa leaned forward, jaw tight. Marcus whispered something to the lead lawyer. Melissa shuffled papers nervously. And suddenly, the truth settled into place with terrifying clarity. Someone inside this company had altered financial records. Someone had manipulated operational data. And someone else, quietly, carefully, had chosen to warn me. But the most dangerous realization came last. If the insurance coverage failed, if operational liability shifted, how long would it take before everything my father built started to fall apart? Fear sat heavy in my chest. But it didn't control me anymore. Not after what I had just seen. Not after understanding how deep this situation really ran. I slid my phone back into my pocket and forced myself to breathe slowly, steadying my pulse before lifting my head again. Panic would make me reckless. Recklessness would give them exactly what they needed. Control, that was what mattered now. Across the table, the lead lawyer flipped through his binder again. Faster this time. His earlier confidence fading into something sharper. His fingers paused briefly on a tab marked with a yellow strip, then moved again, searching. That movement caught my attention immediately, not because of what he found, but because of how he looked while searching. Careful, focused, concerned. For the first time since I entered the room, the lawyers didn't look prepared. They looked uncertain. I shifted my weight slightly, pressing my palms against the edge of the table as memories surfaced. Not emotional ones this time, but procedural. My father's office. The sealed envelope. The weight of his voice when he placed that document in front of me. This document stays with you. Not the company. Not accounting. Not legal. You. At the time, I hadn't understood why that mattered. Now, standing inside this room, surrounded by people trying to erase my role, the meaning began to sharpen. That agreement wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't symbolic. It was structural. My thoughts raced through everything I had just seen on that phone. The altered records. The manipulated insurance figures. The careful reshaping of operational data. If insurance coverage depended on stable operations, and operations depended on certified continuity, then removing the person responsible for that continuity could trigger consequences no one here had fully calculated. That realization settled into place like a lock clicking shut. They weren't just firing me. They were removing the keystone. And they didn't fully understand what would happen once it was gone. Vanessa tapped her fingers against the table again, impatience growing louder in the silence. "Rachel," she said sharply. "We're waiting." Her voice carried irritation now, thinly masking the unease beginning to surface beneath it. I lifted my gaze slowly and met her eyes. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something steadier. Calculation. "Before I sign anything," I said calmly, my voice quieter than expected but firm enough to carry across the room. "Have you reviewed my operational contract?" The words landed harder than I anticipated. The room fell still. Even the faint sound of shifting chairs stopped. Vanessa blinked once, confusion flashing across her expression. "Your employment contract?" she asked, her tone dismissive. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "My operational contract." That distinction mattered. And judging by the way the lead lawyer froze mid-motion, he understood exactly why. He stopped flipping pages, looked directly at me, then turned slowly toward Vanessa. "What operational contract?" she asked, irritation sharpening her voice. Marcus shifted beside her, posture tightening. His attention sharpened instantly. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't expected this. I felt something inside me settle, a steadying calm replacing the earlier tension. "I'm listed as the operational guarantor," I said evenly. "Correct." The phrase hung in the air like something fragile and dangerous. Operational guarantor. Not employee. Not manager. Guarantor. Responsibility. Authority. Risk. The lead lawyer moved again, not with confidence this time, but urgency. He flipped backward through his binder, scanning page tabs faster now, searching for language that suddenly mattered more than anything else in the room. Vanessa frowned. Marcus leaned forward slightly, watching the lawyer's movements with sharp intensity. What does that mean? Vanessa asked. Her voice edged with impatience. But no one answered her immediately. Instead, the lawyer found the page he was looking for and began reading silently. The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation thrown earlier. Clock ticks echoed softly from the far wall. Paper rustled faintly. No one spoke. I watched the lawyer's expression carefully. At first, it remained neutral, professional. Then something shifted. His brow tightened. His lips pressed together. He leaned closer to the page. Reading again, slower this time. Carefully. Marcus noticed it too. I saw the moment tension entered his posture. Subtle but unmistakable. What does it say? He asked quietly. The lawyer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he whispered something under his breath. Words too soft for anyone else to hear. Then he leaned toward Marcus, lowering his voice further. Marcus stiffened. Only slightly, but enough. Enough to confirm what I already suspected. They hadn't fully reviewed this clause. They had prepared to remove me without understanding what removing me would trigger. Vanessa shifted in her chair, irritation turning sharper now. Can we move forward? She pressed. We've already reviewed the termination. But the lead lawyer didn't respond to her. Instead, he closed the binder halfway and exhaled slowly, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the weight of someone recalculating risk in real time. For the first time that morning, uncertainty entered the room. Not mine. Theirs. Vanessa noticed it too. What's the issue? She asked, her voice tightening. The lawyer turned toward her slowly. There may be operational exposure risk, he said carefully. The phrase landed like a stone dropped into still water. Operational exposure risk. Not inconvenience. Not delay. Risk. Vanessa blinked, confusion deepening. Marcus leaned closer, whispering something sharp beneath his breath. I didn't need to hear the words. I saw the reaction, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the shift in his posture, calculation replacing confidence. And in that moment, quiet, steady, undeniable. I saw something I hadn't expected to witness that day. Fear. Not loud. Not obvious. But there. Settling into their expressions as realization began spreading through the room. They had prepared for confrontation. Prepared for resistance. Prepared for arguments. But they had not prepared for the consequences of removing the person tied to operational continuity. They hadn't prepared for me. And as I stood there, silent and steady, watching the tension ripple across their faces, one final thought settled into place inside my mind. If they forced me out anyway, what exactly would collapse first? The room went so quiet I could hear the second hand of the wall clock ticking behind me. No one spoke. No one moved. The lead lawyer removed his glasses slowly and rubbed the bridge of his nose, staring down at the open binder in front of him as if the words had suddenly rearranged themselves into something far more dangerous than expected. Vanessa shifted in her chair. What does that mean? She asked again, sharper this time. Operational exposure risk from what? The lawyer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, scanning the page line by line, lips tightening slightly with each second that passed. Marcus leaned closer beside him, his posture rigid now, no longer relaxed or confident. I watched both of them carefully. Every movement, every hesitation. Because hesitation meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant power was shifting. Finally, the lawyer cleared his throat. There is a provision here, he said slowly, choosing his words with obvious care, identifying Rachel Monroe as the primary operational continuity holder. Vanessa blinked. What does that even mean? She asked. Marcus didn't ask anything. He already understood. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, subtle, controlled, but unmistakable. The lawyer adjusted the page slightly and continued reading aloud. This designation requires certified operational transition before any reassignment of her responsibilities. The words settled into the room like dust after impact. Certified operational transition. Not termination. Not reassignment. Transition. Formal. Verified. Completed. None of which had happened. Marcus leaned forward abruptly. Has that process been completed? The lawyer asked, turning his attention toward Vanessa. Vanessa hesitated, just long enough to reveal the truth. No, she said. Because she's being terminated. That's the transition. The lawyer didn't nod. Didn't agree. Instead, he scribbled a quick note in the margin of the document. His movements sharper now, reactive rather than prepared. That is not the same process, he said. Marcus leaned closer. What happens if termination proceeds without that certification? He asked quietly. The lawyer flipped to the next paragraph. His expression changed again, more sharply this time. He read silently first, then again, slower, carefully. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. If Rachel Monroe is removed without certified operational transfer, he said, the company's operational insurance coverage may be suspended. Vanessa's fingers tightened against the edge of the table. What? She asked. Marcus didn't react outwardly. But I saw the shift, the tightening of his shoulders, the way his gaze snapped back toward the page. The lawyer continued. Under this provision, liability shifts directly to company leadership until certification is completed. That sentence landed harder than the first. Liability, leadership, responsibility. Every truck currently on the road, every shipment already scheduled, every contract waiting to be fulfilled, all exposed. Vanessa gripped the table edge, her knuckles whitening. That can't be right, she said. The second lawyer leaned closer to the binder, scanning the text rapidly. His voice dropped to a whisper. Urgent. Sharp. I couldn't hear the exact words. But I didn't need to. The tone alone told me everything. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't planned for this. The lead lawyer straightened slightly. We cannot proceed with termination under current conditions, he said firmly. The words struck like thunder in the silence. For the first time since the meeting began, someone had interrupted Vanessa. Not politely, not cautiously, directly. Marcus turned sharply toward him. Explain, he said. The lawyer didn't hesitate. Without certified operational continuity, all shipment liabilities transfer to company leadership. If coverage lapses, any incident, equipment failure, delivery delay, cargo loss becomes direct financial exposure, each sentence stacked heavier than the last. And if lenders become aware of suspended coverage, he continued, credit lines may be reevaluated. That sentence changed everything. Credit lines, banks, funding, the invisible structure that held the company upright. Marcus leaned closer to Vanessa, whispering rapidly now. His voice carried tension, no longer calm, no longer measured. Calculating damage, estimating risk. The chain reaction had begun. Vanessa's expression hardened. But beneath the frustration, I saw something new. Fear. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. The employees along the wall had grown completely still. Even the smallest movements had stopped. Every set of eyes in the room shifted, not toward Vanessa anymore, toward me, toward the person they had just attempted to remove. I didn't speak, didn't move. Silence had become my strongest position. Marcus ran a hand across his jaw, staring down at the binder again as if searching for a loophole that wasn't there. There must be a workaround, he muttered. The lawyer shook his head slightly. Not without formal certification, he said. Vanessa exhaled sharply, frustration cracking through her composure. So what are you saying? She demanded. The lawyer met her gaze directly. Terminating her today would place the company in immediate operational exposure. The sentence hung in the air like a final verdict. Not suggestion. Not possibility. Fact. No one spoke after that. Not immediately. The silence felt heavier now, no longer controlled by Vanessa or Marcus, but by the reality sitting between us. For the first time since I entered the room, I saw uncertainty ripple through the structure they had built. They had planned every step, prepared every document, arranged every detail. But they hadn't understood the foundation beneath it all. And now, that foundation stood directly across from them. Still, quiet, unmovable. Vanessa turned toward me slowly, her expression no longer confident. Not calm. Measured. Watching. Marcus followed her gaze, studying me with renewed intensity. Not dismissal. Not authority. Assessment. Calculation. They were no longer asking whether I could be removed. They were asking how dangerous it would be to try. I finally spoke. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Calm. Measured. Controlled. Then perhaps, I said slowly, meeting the lawyer's gaze instead of Vanessa's, we should review the full operational structure before making any decisions. No threats. No raised voice. Just logic. Professional. Strategic. The room remained silent, but the balance had shifted completely. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But unmistakably. They had walked into this room expecting to remove me. Instead, they had exposed themselves to risks they didn't fully understand. And as I stood there, watching uncertainty spread across faces that had once looked confident, one realization settled quietly into place. They were no longer deciding my future. They were calculating their own. The silence that followed my words felt different from the silence that had filled the room earlier. Before, it had been heavy with judgment. Now, it carried uncertainty. Vanessa leaned back slowly in her chair, her fingers still pressed tightly against the edge of the table. The confidence she had walked into the room with had faded into something brittle, something that cracked every time the lawyers spoke. Marcus flipped through the binder again. Faster now. His movements sharp with urgency instead of control. The calm calculation that had defined him earlier had shifted into quiet damage assessment. The room no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the risk. The lead lawyer cleared his throat. I recommend we pause any termination action, he said carefully. Effective immediately. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Pause, she repeated. Yes, he replied. Until a full operational review is completed. The words carried authority, not hers. Not Marcus's, but legal authority. The kind that couldn't be dismissed with irritation or confidence. For the first time that morning, someone had taken control of the outcome without raising their voice. Marcus leaned toward Vanessa again, whispering something too low for anyone else to hear. His tone sounded tight, clipped, the sound of someone recalculating strategy in real time. Vanessa's eyes shifted toward me. Not sharp. Not dismissive. Uncertain. That was when the shift became undeniable. Not just in the lawyers. Not just in Marcus. But in the people along the wall. I noticed Daniel first. His shoulders had lowered slightly. The tight tension that had held him rigid earlier, easing just enough to be visible. He still didn't smile. He didn't relax completely. But the fear in his eyes had softened into something else. Relief. Not victory. Relief. The lead lawyer turned toward me. What would you like to do next? He asked. The question landed softly, but its meaning struck deep. For years, I had worked inside this company solving problems no one else noticed. Fixing broken routes, stabilizing failing systems, protecting relationships that kept our business alive. Never once had I been asked what I wanted. Not in a room like this. Not in front of lawyers. Not after being accused. And now the decision sat in front of me like a door waiting to be opened. I looked at Vanessa. Then Marcus. Then the employees along the wall. Revenge would have been easy. Demand her removal. Expose Evan immediately. Push until everything collapsed. But collapse wasn't leadership. My father had taught me that long before this day. Real strength didn't destroy. It stabilized. I want a full operational audit, I said calmly. Independent. External. The lawyer nodded immediately. Already writing notes. And financial records reviewed? I continued. Every adjustment tied to shipment performance. Marcus shifted slightly, tension returning to his posture. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. Neither of them interrupted. That silence told me everything. They understood the risk now. Until that review is complete, I added. No one makes structural changes to operations. The lawyer finished writing and looked up. That is reasonable, he said. Reasonable. That word settled into the room like fresh air. Not revenge. Not punishment. Correction. Marcus finally spoke. Rachel, he said. Voice measured again but no longer confident. We can discuss adjustments without escalation. I met his gaze steadily. This isn't escalation, I said quietly. It's stabilization. Vanessa exhaled slowly, tension still visible in every movement. For the first time since the meeting began, she didn't argue, didn't challenge, didn't interrupt. The lawyers began outlining next steps: formal audit procedures, temporary oversight, documentation review. Their voices filled the room with structured language, steady and professional, accountability, verification, compliance, words that carried weight far heavier than accusations. And as they spoke, I noticed something else shift, not legally, not structurally, but emotionally. Respect. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet, but unmistakable. One of the senior dispatchers, the same man who had warned me earlier with that subtle shake of his head, gave the smallest nod in my direction. Acknowledgement. Trust restored. That moment mattered more than any legal victory, because respect isn't granted by position. It's earned through consistency, through stability, through preparation. The meeting ended without applause or confrontation. Just careful steps forward. Measured corrections. A new structure forming from the cracks left behind. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside the warehouse alone. The air smelled the way it always had. Diesel. Dust. Distant grain drifting through the breeze. Trucks sat parked in long rows, quiet and still under the fading afternoon light. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to breathe fully. Not shallow. Not guarded. Deep. The weight in my chest loosened slowly as the reality of what had happened settled into place. They had called it attitude, resistance, difficulty. But standing there in the quiet yard, I understood what it had truly been. Persistence. Preparation. Strength built quietly over years when no one was watching. I thought about the night my father placed that envelope in front of me. The way he didn't explain everything. Didn't offer reassurance. Didn't soften the responsibility he handed me. He trusted me to understand it when the time came. And today, I had, not with anger, not with revenge, with structure, with clarity, with patience. The word attitude echoed in my mind again, but it didn't sound like criticism anymore. It sounded like survival. Because sometimes the very thing people dismiss as stubbornness is the thing that saves everything when pressure hits. I leaned against the side of the nearest truck, letting my fingers trace the cool metal surface, remembering years of early mornings, late nights, and impossible deadlines that shaped every part of this company. What they had tried to remove wasn't just a person. It was a foundation, and foundations don't disappear easily. They endure. They wait until pressure reveals their value. If you've ever been told you were too difficult, too stubborn, too unwilling to stay quiet when something felt wrong, then you probably understand this feeling better than most. Have you ever had a moment when someone underestimated you, only to realize later that you were the one holding everything together? If that's happened to you, I'd really like to hear about it. Share your story in the comments. Because sometimes the strongest lessons come from experiences we almost didn't survive. And if this story reminded you that preparation matters more than titles, that quiet strength often speaks louder than authority, stay with this channel. There are more stories like this, stories about betrayal, resilience, and the moments when the tables turn in ways no one expects. Because sometimes the quietest strength is the one that changes everything.